Wonderful. Got
Preparing to
it.
live stream meeting. Woo.
Yay!
I'm so happy in my schedule. I put 1:15.
Hey, look, see, you
Done.
were so prepared. See, I need to do that. I need to just mark
It's
everything as 15
working.
minutes later.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to chat. Okay. Miss Gianu System, why don't you go ahead and
Hey.
introduce yourself for us?
Oh, hi. So we are the Gianu system. We have been diagnosed with DID and have been making educational content for 3+ years on it. So,
That's fantastic. And I believe that you're also an author.
oh, absolutely, friends. Um, so when you have DID, there's a variety of interests. So we have a very light and fluffy, cute book about cats and dogs, where a rescue cat's family gets a puppy, and this is not okay. And then we have a dark, gritty vampire thriller called The Survivors. So they are as different as they can be, but they're both excellent.
That's fantastic. And I also remember you mentioning through your content that you're a wife and mother.
Yes. So we just celebrated 22 years. That's my anniversary present. And it says
Oh,
always because we're big nerds um and we have two teenagers, which is actually going better than we were told that it would go, but also I think it's just our parenting style. When they were very little, when most people were like, oh, they're the best, that was really hard on us. And now that they're teens, we're like, this is great.
oh, hang on. For whatever reason, it says that this is private.
Oh,
Edit video.
interesting.
Let's fix that. Visibility
Okay.
public, customization, live chat on. Yay! It's working.
And it's still not 1:15. You're still early.
I am still early. And don't worry, your introduction was caught, so we don't have to do that. Oh, no more in chat says it's very nice to meet you.
It's nice to be here.
Okie dokie. So how old were you whenever you were diagnosed?
So we were 36, and not at all expecting this kind of life shift. The 30s were really good, but we weren't expecting a whole different like view on our entire reality to hit us in 30s.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. What was your life like before you were diagnosed?
So, um, like we knew we had trauma and we did a lot of like self-help stuff. We're poor, so we're definitely not looking at like therapy just as an elective. Um, and we we were functional. We were like getting along just fine. Held several jobs, like our favorite being at a vet, so that's the cat and puppy novel. But we began to, so we have a connective tissue disorder, Ehlers-Danlos, and after pregnancy, apparently estrogen makes it worse. Like our physical health started to devolve, and so um, we were like the sickest that we had ever been right around system discovery time. So it was just like everything in our life suddenly exploded at the same time.
Oh, I can't even imagine how hard that was. Even now, whenever I feel like I might have a chronic issue, occasionally a possibility will come up. I panic a little bit because I don't know how to deal with processing my mental chronic issues and physical chronic issues on top of that. So that takes a special kind of strength.
It was it was a lot. The like early on in discovering the system, I learned about one of the other altars, which I hadn't even known. Like I'd only known one altar as I was literally crying on my countertop, trying to adjust to my new dietary needs and my new physical issues and my new mental issues. And in the background, this new altar is arguing with the other altar. And I was just like, nope, this is just the worst.
Oh, that's so much to handle all at once.
Mhm.
Um, how was it like how was it growing up with this covert disorder? And can you look back on some instances this disorder affected you, looking back on what you remember from your childhood? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So we um definitely is a covert disorder we didn't realize. The first time I I in my memory that there was like dissociation or time loss, looking back, I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, and I was staring up at the moon, and we had uh our family had gone on a fishing trip, and we just got to the car to load up all the fishing gear, and there was a lot. And so I dropped my gear and I was looking up at the moon, and then the next thing I know, our father is like, hey, it's time to go. All the gear was in the car, all the people were in the car. And like, it was my first like real time blip of, oh, that's weird. Um, but I didn't think anything of it. I um wrote off my memory issues as being absent-minded. And I still like I have sticky notes everywhere. And so I was able to find a way to function within how my brain functioned and not be like cognitively aware. Was I aware that every time I ended up doing my hair in this one style, I was always in a very specific mood the entire day? Yes. Like it was obvious. Like my husband would be aware. He'd be like, "Oh, you're wearing that, or your hair looks like this. It's going to be this kind of a day." And I'm like, "You don't know that. That's not like for oh yeah, because it was the altars being like very covertly present, and it was something that was notable, but not that we knew like the extent of it." My best friend, when she met Lil for the first time, she later was like, I've met her before at sleepovers when it was very late. Like I met her. And yeah, I find a lot of systems will say like when it's really late is a lot of times that the altars kind of like sneak out. So despite that, like we weren't we had dreams our whole life of there being like more than one of us. And I just posted about a dream today that I found in my Facebook memories from 12 years ago. And in the dream, it's about the Wizard of Oz being really about Dorothy remembering who she was because she had the death of her child, which caused stress-induced amnesia. All of her Oz friends help her slowly recover herself so she can grieve and return home to herself. And I put in the Facebook post, what a strange thing you are, my brain. Like, where did this come from? And it would be 6 years later before I knew about DID. And here my brain was, without having psychological terms to lean on, trying to explain to me the amnesia, the fragmentation, and being like, hey, look, this is going on.
Right, right. And on to one of my favorite questions. Would you mind explaining for us dissociative identity disorder?
Oh, absolutely. So my favorite way to explain it is to break it down. So dissociation, everybody dissociates. It is a normal brain thing. Um, Most people experience it when they're driving in the car and suddenly they're home and they don't remember the ride. Like if they were driving, they don't even know if they stopped at the stop sign. Like the ride is just gone. That's dissociation. And in normal brains, it's kind of like the brain's low power mode. Doesn't have to be here, and it just like checks out. Totally normal. Everybody does this. With DID, it gets to a disordered component. So first, dissociation. Second, identity. Our current understanding of identity is that everybody has a fragmented sense of consciousness until a certain age when the brain is able to coalesce that all into a single stream of consciousness, which is between 4 and 9, and depending on the child, like it's not a set age, it's like a developmental mark. Um, and you've seen this if you've ever interacted with kids, because toddlers exist in these ego states, and 1 minute they are melting down, the world is ending, and the next, like the flip of a switch, they're fine and eating a cookie and telling you about the thing they did just a minute ago, and the crying is gone, it's forgotten. um and that's because they don't have this unified consciousness. They have these ego states, like the ego state of play and the ego state of needing comfort from providers. And these are separate from each other. If repeated trauma happens before the brain learns this trick of coalescing consciousness, what it does is it can not only keep these ego states separate, but produce amnesic walls so that they're unaware of each other. So play can go outside, be with friends, unaware that when they go in the house, things are not okay. They can be in this moment and be okay, unburdened by trauma that's happening elsewhere. So it's very adaptive, um, and helps the child to actually be able to function despite horrific things happening. But what happens is, as the child grows, the brain also grows, and these ego states grow, but they grow separate from each other, uninformed by what the others know. So if you all you were the worst things that happened to you, or all you are the good things that's happened, or all you are is just going to work and you're not informed by these other parts, you're going to present very differently. And that's where you get into the disordered aspect. With amnesia, there's often time loss and confusion. People with DID, especially early before they learn to communicate, have often found themselves in places where they didn't know where they were or what was happening. And what was protective in childhood can then become distressing in adulthood. And this is where we get the idea of multiple personalities, which, they changed the name of it. It's no longer called that, to reflect what it is, which is a dissociative identity disorder.
I love your explanation, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to ask. It is a brilliant one, and one
Yeah.
that is very, very clearly informed from several sources. And I say this on my channel all the time. I adore cross-referencing. Cross-referencing is the best.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
um, did you know about DID before you were diagnosed? And if you did, how did you view it?
Yes. So, as a writer, I was familiar with it. I'd seen it used in several books, and even had thought to myself, maybe one day I'll write my own book, but instead of having that person be the villain, I'll have them be like a normal character or maybe the hero. And so I was familiar with it from a writing trope angle, but my knowledge was very surface. Like, I understood it as multiple personalities. And I thought, if I ever write that book, I'll have to do some more research. But it turned out differently. I've done lots of research. I still haven't written the book though.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. Would you mind sharing with us the story of how your diagnosis came about?
So I was, very like functional, and which the disorder is covert. It tries not to draw attention to itself. And it wasn't until that functionality got challenged that I was like, I need to go to therapy. I woke up one morning with no memory of what had happened for the past several days, that just gone, just a blank, and numb. And when I say numb, Like I felt nothing. So like our hubs was very, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know I think this is some like leftover childhood trauma thing, but I don't know. And I was as distressed as you can be intellectually. Like I knew up here, like this is bad, but I didn't feel anything at all. Um, and that is what the thing that caused me to go to therapy. And the first session of therapy, I got triggered and I didn't know that's what it was, sucked into an emotional flashback, trying to explain why I was here. And at the end, the therapist is just holding his mug and he was like, do you think that maybe next time your husband would be able to come with you? Um, And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. He signed the papers. And what that did is allowed me to stay in the window of tolerance so I could actually have effective therapy. Because when I would start to get like sucked back in, he would just put a hand on me and it would help to ground me and bring me into the present.
Mm.
Um, but that process, we did therapy for a year before I learned about the altars. A year of just safety and stability, just being able to be okay in the present, realizing that I wasn't okay in the present, that I never felt anger and that that was weird and not normal. And when I got to a place of that stability, it's when the system was like, oh, okay, great. Now we're ready to throw some more in the mix. And E started yelling at me in the headspace. And I was terrified. Was like, does this mean that I'm crazy now? Like, is that what this like I no clue what was going on, even though I was passingly familiar with DID. Like I had no clue what was happening. Um, and it took me a couple days to get up the gumption to even tell the hubs. Because I was just like, what do you do with a voice in your head yelling at you? And so I told him, and his response was, well, have you tried asking her why she's angry? And I was like, no, I'm not trying to encourage the voice in my head. But that was what exactly what needed to happen. And so he helped us to start communicating with each other. And next therapy session, I was like, so there's this angry teenage voice yelling at me in my head. And the therapist was like, is this an inside voice or is this like outside and auditory? I was like, oh, it's inside, but I've never even thought these things before. And that was them distinguishing between schizophrenia and psychosis versus DID and alters. And that was our introduction.
Wow. That is, it's so fantastic that you had an environment that was so supportive that gave you all the right answers. That your husband, that response is fantastic.
Mhm.
Um, which brings me to my next question. What was your initial reaction to receiving your diagnosis?
So several things. First there was like grieving the whole like, can I even have a life? What does this mean for me now? But then also, oh, that makes so much sense. Like looking back and seeing things throughout my life going, oh, that's why this happened. That's why this happened. That's why I do things this way. And it made it just made sense, but it was also terrifying. And it's been my experience that a lot of systems, the beginning of system discovery is very loud and very difficult. And it was no different for us. Like everybody who had been on lockdown for years had opinions and they wanted to be heard, and they were finally able to say those things. So it was confusing, it was scary, it made perfect sense. And it's this moment where I'm over on my counter crying, going like does does life even get better from this? Like, is this always how things are going to be from here on out? Um, and one of my big messages I try to get across on our channel is that no, like life gets better, like you heal. It's not always scary and hard, and you can have a life with this disorder.
Actually, that was a huge message that I got from your channel. I don't think I was in therapy before I found your channel, and I don't check my Instagram DMs ever. And my sweet love had been spamming me videos, your videos. He started with the one where your husband could tell who was fronting because he could tell who was fronting with me. And he was
Mhm.
like, "Doesn't this look familiar?" And I was so scared. For many years, there was many years where I thought this had a spiritual explanation as opposed to a medical explanation. And I was too scared to look at the possibility of it being a medical explanation. But your channel gave me hope, and it was a huge inspiration to me. And it was the reason whenever I got my diagnosis, I did not feel that way. I felt very happy that I had finally accomplished that, that I had finally been brave enough to get my diagnosis. I remember coming out of the clinic and telling my love, and he was celebrating with me, and it was a good day. And you can take some credit for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings me to my next question. How did your family take your diagnosis?
Well, so the Hubs is very social. He's an extrovert. And so for him, like this was more people to love. Which so many people, their partners leave them when they get this diagnosis. It is difficult, it is challenging, and I'm so grateful that his response is like, oh yay, like new friends, and who are they and what are they like and what are, because when we were afraid of ourselves and not able to interact with each other, he would be like, oh well, I like them, they're like this and that, and would help bridge that gap so that we could see each other in a different light. um and it was truly healing, and our therapist has remarked that we healed like quickly for people with our disorder, um and progressed, rather I should say, quickly, and we attribute that to there being a safe place at home to continue to process. We didn't have to hide or mask, and having that support, it really made a huge difference. Um, Helped us to be brave enough to tell friends, which most of them took it very well. There was one friend in particular who was like, well, if that's what you have to believe to feel better. And I was like, excuse me, like, that's not how this works. Also, this makes everything harder. Um, So, um, but in learning how to talk to our friends and family is how we developed the way we tell people what DID is, because we learned to break it down in ways that they could process, so they don't just immediately go to Sybil or Split and go, oh, that thing, and instead can relate it to themselves and go, oh, I could see how that could happen. Um, but largely that process was, it was slow, like we just one at a time did, but it was largely positive.
That's fantastic. I my actually my experience was very similar. Mine was also largely positive, and I currently have a very large network of friends and supporters, not just in my online community, which, hi guys, thank you so much for being here today. I see you all in chat. I see you guys. Um, I'm so sorry for asking this, but do you know what your altars look like?
Oh, absolutely. So our we had an understanding kind of you just I think for some of us we just knew, but then we would get glimpses of the inner world. Other altars would come out and be like, "Oh, they look like this." So even if there wasn't like a shared memory, um, there would be shared like Lil would draw, and let's see, got our
Oh, it's so
drawing.
handy that you have everything just right there on your little shelves.
Yes. And so Lil would draw for us, everybody, and which was funny because Jenna, the host, could only draw stick figures. So, like, to go from only stick figures to, there we go, like that kind of thing
Oh,
was
wow.
very dramatic. So that's E. And let me see. Oh, I was wondering where that went. Random piece of paper. And then this is Lil when she's younger and when she is older, because Lil was an age slider. Um, and so um, we had a fairly good idea, and there was some access to the inner world, which I know not every system has, and not every system has easy access. Here is JA.
Ah, she kind of looks like Beatrix, just a little bit. Her features are severe, and so is Beatrix's, although Beatrix
Mhm.
prefers her gelled pixie cuts.
Yes. Well, the first time it was so funny because JA is um very matter of fact and brusque, and to find out that she likes wearing frilly girly stuff while being absolutely kick-ass was such a funny dichotomy, because it's like I will look girly and don't you dare say a thing about it. Like I don't even want to hear I look pretty. Like, mm-mm. And then we have Caleb and his tiger on the loam.
Oh, perfect. That brings me, we're about to come into our altars section. I'm gonna go
Mhm.
ahead and jump into one. Would you mind explaining non-human altars? Because I think your explanation of this is brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. So DID develops in a child's mind. Um, and as such, the subconscious grabs onto whatever imagery best encapsulates this idea it's trying to portray. So perhaps if in the family, the only person who was treated well was the family dog, there might be a alter who's the good boy, who is the one who gets, attention and praise and does the right things. And the alter is in the form of a dog, because that's the brain goes, aha, here's the best way to encapsulate this. Likewise, a lot of us who weren't in very safe environments would get into a media, TV, or cartoons. And so one of my friends there, they have a like a superwoman alter, and she's the one who does everything and takes care of everything and doesn't really feel a lot of pain. And that alter is just the brain's way of like having this concept that a child can understand of like, I'm going to take care of this. And so Superwoman, I'm going to take care of all the day-to-day stuff. I've got it. I can do it. Um, and so you get angels, or if religious, you can have angels and demons, you could have fairies. And the technical term for this is introject. I had a troll be like, you can't have fictives. That's not a thing. I was like, well, that's the terminology of the community, fictives and factives, for a fictional introject, or one that's based on a person. But introject is the actual psychological term of the brain taking outside influence, whether it's real or fictional, and forming a part based on that. And a lot of people do also have introjects of abusers, of the parent or the whatever. And this is where we kind of get the idea of um, persecutors, which, I know we'll talk about later. But that's also like a safety mechanism, the whole thing of like, if I do this to me, then no one else can hurt me. Like I'll be safe. Um, so all of this is about survival.
That, yes, that is my favorite explanation. I've tried many times to word that, and you can ask a couple of members of my chat. I've tried many times to word that well, and I just cannot seem to get it right. So thank you so much for thank you. How many altars have you been aware of at once?
We like to say about 10, because it's kind of tricky. How do you count? So if they're fused, are they one or two? Um, if it's just in the inner world and it's never fronted, but you're pretty sure they're an altar, like, so about 10 has been our answer. I do believe the average for a system is around 15, but it does vary between men and women, the average number of altars. But it's not uncommon to have polyfragmented systems with hundreds of altars.
And how have you dealt with body dysmorphia between altars? This is a question that's actually really dear to me. I have some male altars that are very interested to know the answer to this question.
The first time that Caleb had to deal with it, was he ended up being an H fighter, but he was still a little at this point and caught sight of the reflection of the body in the mirror and just started crying, like, I don't want to be a girl. Like, not only did he not want to be grown, but he didn't want to be a girl. And so um we had this conversation, the hubs and the other alters with him about trans people and explaining that sometimes you're in a body that doesn't match you, and letting him know that there were other people who understood what it is to look at your body and say, that's not me, that's not how I look. And um so just one, knowing that he wasn't alone in his experience was really comforting. But then we tried as much as possible to let whoever was out pick what was being worn, what we were, how we presented. So if Caleb was out in the morning, he got to pick what we wore, and he would pick like the baggiest clothes and the anything to hide this area and a beanie to get the hair back and out of our face. And just things that made him feel more comfortable in the girl body, which is what he ended up calling it, got to take care of the girl body. And so to know that this was the body that he was in, but that wasn't him. And at the same time, he could do things with the body to help him feel more comfortable, was how we navigated it.
I One of the reasons I appreciate my love so much is he will occasionally, whenever he's out shopping, grab things for my altars. He will grab a leather jacket and he'll be like, I saw Canis and he needed to have this. And it's so beautiful and it's so validating because they'll put it on like a pair of boots that again he bought for Canis. He usually buys stuff for the boys because the girls have quite a selection of clothes, unless it's Beatrix. He's got a few things for Beatrix because and he got our little a great big baggy t-shirt with bumblebees on it and she loves it so much.
Yes.
Um, so have you had to develop any guidelines or rules in interacting with each other? And if so,
Absolutely.
what are they?
So it has been our experience, and everyone with the idea is different, and everyone's journey is their own. But it has been our experience that trauma happens in the body, and that our trauma holders heal through time in the front, through being in the body. Um, which is really hard because a lot of times they're antagonistic toward the body, or they don't want front because they've had these difficult experiences. Um, and so to provide like the safety and ability for them to do that, we had some very basic rules. Um, Rule number one was that nobody hurts the body. Um, we all have to share this. And um, it was a point of chagrin when the protector pointed out to Jenna, like, you're the one who breaks that the most because with our chronic illness, you push us past our limits all the time. Like you're thinking about like cutting and that sort of thing, but you hurt
Ah,
our body more than any of us, which was a big aha moment. Um, so rule number one, no one hurts the body. Rule number two, you don't make a change that will affect all of us without asking. So that included like haircuts, like having difficult conversations with friends where it could go poorly. Like you don't just like go in guns blazing because you think this conversation needs to happen. Like check in first. Um and like that sort of thing, which if you want to like paint the nails, choose what we're wearing, that's fine. Do what you want with the day, so long as there's not like we have to go to this meeting. But don't do something that's going to affect everybody without asking. Um, and so it very much like safety and stability grounded. And so long as you could stay in those rules, like you could go front, do, be whatever. Like you can be yourself, do what you'd like. Um, and that was really very freeing and healing for them to say, oh, like one of the littles, when I'm out, I can put on some PJs or some wings and go watch cartoons. Oh, yeah, so long as like we got nothing else that has to happen, like we don't have to go grocery shopping, go put on your PJs and watch some cartoons. Um, and for trauma holders to be able to be like, can I just go away and not be around people? Yeah. Yeah, just go where you find safe. Where is that? I don't know. Okay, well, you can figure that out. This time is yours to be able to learn. Um, and so just having a few simple rules were really helpful. Some people have a lot more detailed rules, whatever works with your system.
absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. We have a voting system, which is
Mhm.
yep, vote. We gotta vote. We gotta vote on almost everything, especially if it is has to do with the body and especially if it's we had to all agree to shave the sides of our head whenever we did that. And it was hard. It was so hard, especially for the girls, but they made that compromise for the guys and now they can still wear their hair down and appear feminine and the guys can tie their hair up and they can appear masculine. And it's been this beautiful compromise for us. And it took a lot of bravery, but we had to vote. And so it took months before it was able to happen.
Same with us. We have a voting system and majority rules, and alters will campaign for months on an issue. They'll absolutely be like, "Hey," for us, cutting our hair was a big one as well. Like, "Hey, it's okay because if we cut our hair, like we can get some wigs and play, and it'll be like," and slowly winning the ones who voted nay over, so that we can have a revote and maybe get our hair cut next time. And it can take months, but then the system learns to communicate, to cooperate, and to trust each other.
That, yes, that has really happened. And it's so interesting how some bonds in the system can be stronger than others. Like we have a few that are attached to Lo, our guardian, like almost like hands on his coattails just all the time because he makes them feel safe. And they don't
Mhm.
even communicating with other alters can take a bit of bravery sometimes, which is so it can be so strange because that's you can sit there and you can go, but wait, isn't this all me?
Right.
Why am I
And
nervous to talk to myself?
well, because this part of you was sectioned off for a reason, and the brain that made that barrier does not want to easily hop over that barrier without being like, we can do this now, right? Right? Like we've got the skills to bring down the wall that I put in for safety, right? It's very scary.
Um, did you and your alters have relatively equal time in therapy? And if you did, how was that organized? This one I need to know for personal information.
So we at the beginning, it was whoever was in the front at the time for therapy was who went to therapy. So like the therapist got whoever was fronting. But then when trauma holders would be dealing with something different or when alters would be arguing, we, with permission, would use positive triggers to help them come forward so that they could bring those things up during therapy. And that was a process. Some of the alters were like, hey, I'll try it, and then would show up and be like, I don't even know how to talk about this. Like, I don't know what good it's gonna do. Like, but they told me to try it, so I'm here. And honestly, that was the step that worked, and show up and slowly, bit by bit, uh, get the help that they needed to be able to heal.
Um, how has your family gotten along with your alters?
So, um, the hubs has, of course, ended up just loving everyone. Just 100%. The um my mom was so excited when she met E, because she was like, you never had a teen years. You were never a typical teenager. You went from your childhood to like a little adult. And she was so excited to know that I was able to reclaim that and to have the teenage experience even as an adult. Um, our kiddos, so the oldest, he's just, I don't, he just takes it in stride. Like he is aware, but it's just like, oh, that's just mom. It's all mom. The youngest very much wanted to know who was fronting and would pay attention. Um, and and he had favorites for sure, but a kid is gonna have favorites.
Hmm.
So like him and Caleb got along really well. You know, they both wanted to do like kind of teenage guy stuff, like video games. And Caleb was, we were camping and he looked over and was like, if we throw a watermelon in a bonfire, does the water inside boil and the melon explode or what? So like him and the teens had a great like, we should do this. Like it was a very guy bonding experience. Um, but even with having favorites for parenting, that was something that we all took very, very seriously, knowing what can happen when a child isn't protected. So we all would wear the mom hat when we were out. It would just look a little different. When our youngest was being bullied in middle school, like, Jenna is very, oh, blood, the whole, I'll call the teacher and tell me all about it. And JA literally got down on his level after one incident, was like, you are a badass. And these people are stupid that they don't recognize it. There is nothing wrong with you. Very different parenting styles for the same end. And I think that um, he just absorbed it all.
My chat is being so supportive. They're saying things like, it's so interesting to hear how humanizing therapy can be. Hearing that alters can be as reluctant as everyone else is so interesting. Uh, and the dynamic of children with system parents is fascinating to think about. I've never considered it. I love my little community. They're little learners, and that's what I love about them is because I'm a learner too.
Yes, that's the best thing that for me as someone with DID is when people are curious, because if they're asking me questions, I know they feel safe enough to ask questions. Like they want to know. And that's always been the best way for me to interact with people.
I agree 100%. Um, how did your alters all get along before the fusion?
So we, like a family, which you have the two siblings that never ever stop fighting, and you have the ones who love each other, and the ones who like kind of ignore each other. So we ran the gamut of cooperation. um there were definitely times in the system where like one alter specifically said of the other, I can't share the same body with him. And I was like, well, that's kind of, you're gonna have to figure that out because you share the same body. And another time, two different alters, the one was like, I will find where he resides in our consciousness and I will carve him out of it. And we didn't know if that was a thing that she could do, but she was dead set on it. So like he would hide. And so it was a process of learning to trust each other. Then and trust doesn't even mean like, just like, okay, well, I know if they're fronting, they're not gonna screw things up. Then from trust to cooperate, which still doesn't mean like, it means like I will talk to them and like maybe vote for the haircut. I still don't like them. I still don't want to talk to them like for any other reason, but like we can do a thing together. And then from there to understanding, which is where I try and tell people to get to. It's like you have to hear them when you have a difference of opinion. You don't have to agree, but if you can understand where they're coming from, then you guys can actually like know each other and work together. Like when JA was like, all men are awful and it's terrible that you've married a man and he will hurt us. Like I could be like, oh, he's different. That does nothing to help her with the trauma that she knows that she's experienced. But to understand why she thinks that way, what's informed that opinion, and to say, okay, that's really like you have a lot of reasons to feel that way. My experience with him has not been that. But I'm not going to ask you to trust him because you don't have that experience. So we still disagreed, but in that other scenario, she's heard and she knows that, so she can like trust that I'll hear her in the future, even if I don't agree. Um, and that's the basis. About I would say 3 or 4 months before fusion, JA and Devi, that's the one she was wanting to cut him out of our consciousness, uh, finally like brokered a kind of peace. They were, I wouldn't call them friends, but they were like, I don't know, they were like buds. Like it wasn't deep, but it was like, okay, like, oh, okay, okay. They're okay. Um, and I think that was something that was important to happen before we could come together.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I have so many questions about Fusion here in a minute. But first, my
Mhm.
chat has an excellent question. No More in chat says, my child thinks they might be a system. Do you have any advice?
Absolutely. I've had a lot of parents pop in with this question. Um, so the first thing is, if you can, therapy. When we started, we were still poor, and there are therapists who are free. Um, there's a lot of different ways to find them. The United Way, I have a YouTube vid on it, but the United Way will know therapist office who have grants for people who are low income. Most colleges who offer a major in psychology or counseling will have a free therapy like schooling so that their graduates can get the experience they need to get their degree. And that's where we started. It was great for safety and stability. Um, but there are tests that the therapists can administer that will distinguish, because there's a lot of disorders that have overlapping symptoms, especially with dissociation. And so there are tests that can distinguish between the types of dissociation. clinical stuff aside, just meet them in their experience where they're at. You're not going to cause an alter to form. Like if this isn't DID and they're like, hey, can you call me this at that time? Call them that. Like it's fine. Um, take note of, because with DID, the alters are very different. So become a student of the moods, and because alters are going to be very consistent. So like Anthony loves salmon, very flirty, very friendly and engaging. JA, very antagonistic, hates salmon. Oh, balloons. I forgot that this does that. I've I've got like hand signals on and I always forget. And so they're going to be very distinct and they might not remember between each other. So become a student and note, okay, when their body language is a certain way and their voice is a certain way, they tend to act this way. And then you can approach them in a way that is appropriate for that. And I would also recommend just being really understanding, because with DID, there's a lot of memory blips. So I told you to do this. No, you didn't. If it's DID, you may have told Alter A and Alter B have no knowledge of it. Like I said, we have sticky notes everywhere. We have a visual, real life, physical camera, not camera, calendar, because we have to visually see even multiple times a day what's going on in our day to be able to keep that in mind. So to help them find ways to be functional and work within how their mind works is wonderful. And also, like, we call it a disorder, but in my opinion, it's a neurodivergence. Like the brain develops a different way to interact with consciousness. And so, like, they're not broken. They're functioning. And the things that are going to be most distressing will be the PTSD symptoms. It'll be the flashbacks. It'll be the times where they're not aware that they're in now time and they're still stuck in trauma. Um, so um, learning how to navigate that with compassion will help, but not to think of the alters themselves as something that needs to be fixed. Like this is the brain's way of surviving. This is the fix. This is the we did it. And really what needs help is navigating through the PTSD, the trauma, the flashbacks. And that can be very difficult.
Perfect. That's a thank you. Thank you. I know for a fact that that person really needed an answer to that question. So thank you.
Mhm.
Um, how did you all just get a little Oh, can you describe your inner world? This is a personal curiosity question.
Absolutely. So for everybody, it's different. And the first time that like Jenna was even aware of the inner world was um, she was laying down, getting ready to go to bed, and just a blip, like her eyes were closed, but she was not asleep, a blip of E tucking Lil into a bed. And she was like, oh my gosh, that was the inner world. And then the alters in the inner world being like, oh, you saw that? Like, um, and so the inner world is often like hard for hosts to access because the job of the host is to do day-to-day interacting, and the inner world is distracting from the day-to-day interactions that you need. But it's we call it like a sandbox where the subconscious makes this place where if an alter is not conscious and interacting with the world, but they are conscious, they can interact with the subconscious world. And for us, let me see here. There was a forest, and in the clearing of the forest was a large house, which everybody had a room in. Um, yeah, here we go. Okay, so let me see. We have the house and the forest. There's a the ocean down here. There's a cave in there somewhere. Um,
I have a bunny
and
burrow in mine.
I love it. It can be very, it can really offer safety to have like this place where you can just go and run and hide. Um, and so in the house it was 2 levels and everybody had a room. And then up in the attic we had the a conference room, which was something that our therapist helped us to construct. That was not some aspects of it really is kind of like a dream where some aspects are permanent and you can't mess with them, but there are some things that you can change or build or do. So our therapist was like, let's see if we can construct a conference room where the alters who want to talk with each other and interact with each other can join. But we can put a lock on the door. We can do these things to make sure information isn't shared that's not safe to be shared. And that was actually very, very helpful for us. We used that a lot.
Uh, I love the inner world. Mine is also a big house. And our we don't have a meeting room yet. Normally meetings have been happening in other people's bedrooms, but that can bring a sense of feeling cornered. So it might be good to have a meeting room. Not that
A
any of
neutral space.
yeah, a neutral space. That way
Mhm.
no one's intruding on anyone else's territory. That's actually a really great idea. Um, can you talk to us about what the purpose of persecutors are within a system?
Mhm. So, um, if you have a parent who, if you don't do everything right, you're punished very severely. The brain says, okay, I don't want to be physically punished. And they can absorb this kind of idea and alter form who takes the things that were said outside and says them inside. Look at that. I can't believe you did that. That's not right. You need to do it again. Like, and uses those same external cues to try and keep the behavior of the person within these parameters so that then they're not externally punished, which is once again functional when you're a child, but then as you become an adult can be very painful and detrimental. And the same thing can be true of other behaviors that people see as like, well, that's so harmful. Why would you do that? Behaviors like getting blackout drunk. A ultra might come forward and be like, we got too close to these memories. We can't handle them. And here's how to make them go away. And so because we see these behaviors as bad, we say, oh, that's a persecutor. It's been our experience that these alters are protectors that just have learned very maladaptive coping mechanisms. And when they heal and learn healthy coping mechanisms, they become the absolute biggest proponents of keeping the system safe and healthy because that was what they were trying to do all along. They just didn't know any other way than the harmful ways.
It's so interesting you say that we have a former persecutor in our system and his protector, his job, like before he was very self-destructive and he was very reckless. Now he's a protector of fun. He's there to
Yes.
make sure that fun is available and that fun is still had and that we're not just in our bunny burrow, which is what we also call our house, all the time, just, hiding away from the world. He wants us to get out there. He wants to have fun. He gets bored and he wants to go shoot the shit. And
And it's so important.
it is. And his protection is it's so so valuable and I don't know what I would do without it.
My favorite thing has been watching the persecutors heal and seeing how beautiful and how protective they are and seeing all of that energy go to something that is like strong and helpful and then watching them get a different view of themselves. Like to go, oh wait, I'm not a monster. Like I can do good. It is so amazing.
We're gonna do just a few questions on memory, and then we're gonna hop into fusion questions, which I'm super
Okay.
duper excited for. Um, was that a puppy?
That is a puppy here. Sadie, go, come here. Here we go.
Oh my goodness, we have a pet guest on stream. Everybody say hello to Sadie.
Sadie, baby. You good girl. Are you happy? Yeah. She's like, Mom, what are you doing? It's not playing with me. It's not. I love you though.
Okay. So, when did you first becoming aware that you were experiencing gaps in your memory? You mentioned that you were always very forgetful and planning around this. Was this just a part of your life that you built around?
Yeah, we just like, oh, I'm just really scatterbrained was a phrase we said all the time. So people would be like, hey, we're gonna do a thing. Oh, you remember you should text me because I'm really scatterbrained and I'll forget. And I had lots of alarms on my phone, sticky notes everywhere. And so we tend to experience micro amnesia. So we would just miss little blocks of time all the time
Are those what
instead
I
of the
call
big
data
gaps.
transfer errors?
Those are data transfer errors.
Okay, I didn't realize there was an actual term for those, but those are a huge part of my life. There are some, and I'm so grateful to my friends and those who are close to me because they are so patient and they're having to rehab conversations with me, and it's so sweet.
Yes.
Um,
Same.
how do you deal with the little data transfer errors? Because we've now talked about how it kind of affects your daily memory and the little blips.
And so it helps when most of the people around you know. So like the hubs and I will go to like a work event and someone will come up and be like, hi, and he knows our face. So when he knows we don't remember them. And he'll be like, oh, hey, so and so, it's really great. How have you been since? And he'll list the last time we saw them. He'll say their name. So he gives me their name. The last time we saw them, he might even mention their family. So that way, when he sees the oh no, deer in headlights look, he just comes and fills in the conversational bits that I need. Um, but when the people around you know that that happens, you can be like, look, here are the things that I'm doing. I've made an alarm and an extra alarm, but I've told this to my bestie, like, hey, if I don't hop on to our like FaceTime or whatever on time, just hit me, like, because that information can just bloop, disappear at any time.
Yes. Yes, it can. And how did you deal when with the larger gaps when they occurred? This is something that I would really like an answer to because I'm still kind of dealing as alters emerge with the memory issues that come along with that and the differing degree of memory levels that come with each alter, which is also disorienting.
Yeah. So there are several things that we did that were helpful. One is when the hubs knew that we switched, he would be like, hey, what do you remember of the last little bit? And right after a switch, having to reach back could sometimes help solidify wispy memories that otherwise would have just like disappeared through the cracks. Um, but also we made videos when we were out, and not all the time, but like if an altar fronted, they would make a video about like what they did or how they were feeling about what was going on in our life. And so when someone else was in the front, they could go through our phone, and watching those videos gave us a connection. It helped us to once again solidify not only what was going on, but then our understanding of who that was. Um, because like the big fear is like, you know, what happens when I don't remember. And then come to find out for us, what happens is like an altar was grocery shopping and they bought a lot of snacks, but now we have snacks. Like, um, and so learning to trust each other helps with the anxiety of that. And then doing things to improve communication helps not only lessen those, but um, also helps to like keep everybody on track. Like, oh, right, we were doing this thing. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. And even if I don't like really remember being like, okay, that's a thing, we did this and that was over the weekend. So things like that can help keep life like moving more well oiled.
Okay, now we're getting into my favorite section that I've been so excited for. Can you tell us about fusion? And I know you're not a psychologist or a neuroscientist, but do you know the neuroscience behind it? What is and what is your personal experience with it? Just an all-encompassing question.
So right out the gate, it was not what we were expecting. We in our system had like early on decided that we weren't going to pursue fusion and we weren't going to pursue like staying apart, that we were just going to focus on health, and that if fusion happened, it happened, and if it didn't, it didn't, and that would, that was okay. And so this took a pressure off our system to have to be one way or another. We could just be where we were. Um, and I had several ideas about fusion. Um, One was that like, you know, everybody just collapsed into to one, and we were like, we don't want to lose anybody. Like we've gone through so much therapy to learn to love and accept all of us here. Like we don't want to lose anybody. So there was concern around that, but also we had individual alters like come together and fuse, and there was this sense of like loss and grieving because like yes, there's their traits are still there, but like they're individually gone. And so we expected there to be that sense of loss with fusion um, for all of us. But what we found was that sense of loss was because we're outside of it. There's the balloons again. Um, we were outside of the fusion. When we all started to fuse, one, it was for us a slow process. It was very gentle. Like it was subtle. We didn't notice for several weeks. We just got very, very blendy. Um, and for a little bit of time, we actually had more amnesia as I think the barriers were starting to come down, but irregularly. Um, and when I say we didn't notice, it's because there wasn't any loss. It was like we got closer and closer and closer until we were just together. And there have been times when um, one alter's traits were very much more prominent, but there was still the access of the memories, traits, abilities of the others. The way I've explained it, one of the ways, because I'm looking for the best analogies to help people understand, is we really love tea. So if you have lavender tea and you have mint tea and you have cinnamon tea and you have orange tea, these are all their own flavors, full and rounded in their own rights. But you can take these flavors and bring them together, and you're not missing any of the flavors. Nothing's gone, nothing's disappeared. It's an addition, it's a coming together. And depending on what you're eating with that, definitely certain flavors are going to stand out more. Like if you're eating a orange scone, you're probably going to be tasting the orange flavors a little bit more. If you're eating a shortbread cookie, you might taste the lavender a little bit more. Um, and so the environment really um, makes who you're seeing more of um, for us in our system, but nobody's missing. Um, Nobody's gone. And like we still feel all of us, but we don't have the distinction or the separation anymore. and it's been very hard to explain. But we're working on the perfect analogy. So
Um, I actually have here in your Fusion About video you talk I saw your video on Fusion that you did on your channel where you were comparing it to tea, and I was wondering if some flavors were too subtle. But it makes so much sense that the different environment, what you're having with the tea and everything can have a huge effect on the flavor of what you're drinking. That is a very
Mhm.
beautiful way to put that. That answers that question immediately. Thank you. The second
Thanks.
question is, I guess, was it difficult to come to an agreement? Doesn't really apply because you all kind of came together naturally.
It was difficult agreeing on that course of action. Early on, um, Lil, when she was little, was very distressed by the idea of dying. She was like, if we fuse, I die, I disappear, I don't want to not exist. And um, for her, so we're giant nerds. Um, and she had aged up and was learning about lichens. And a lichen is a really interesting creature. So it is the combination of an algae and a fungus. Now, these two exist separately. They're their own things. And fungi are actually closer to animals than they are plants. So they're very distinctly their own things. But they can choose to come together and form this symbiotic relationship that creates a lichen, which then can reproduce more lichen. Like it's fascinating. So it's a whole new thing using the traits of both, where they don't disappear. And so for her, she grasped onto that as like, okay, if that's fusion, I can be on board with that. I just don't want to like die. And so um us all coming to understand that like either way would be okay. Um and that wasn't immediate, and that wasn't something like we could force. It was something we had to think about and talk about. Um but we all felt like health was like the thing to pursue.
How does it feel?
It it feels so full and rounded, um, is the best way I can explain it. I say that all the time to the hubs, like I feel so full. So, for instance, we didn't have access to anger for most of our lives. Um, and then when we did have access to anger, like JA could get angry, he could get angry, but like Jenna couldn't get angry. Several of us didn't have access. So now to at any time be able to be mad and there not have to be an abrupt switch and amnesia is like life enhancing. Um, and as an example, so we tended to freeze, was fight, flight, freeze on. We freeze. People thought they couldn't scare us because if they went rar, we never flinched. Our freeze response was so hard, um, which translated to as we're driving down the road, we would have every now and then a semi come over to our lane and we would freeze and our hubs would reach over and honk, and but we couldn't even like we just freeze. And so since the fusion, we were driving through a busy city. This semi comes over. We honked so fast, like, what are you doing? Get in your, and he gets back over in his lane. And the the satisfaction and the fullness and knowing that this is because we're able to come together and to share this with each other. That the idea of the lichen is now something that is more functional and more able to survive because they're sharing their abilities. It's felt very, very full,
I love learning about lichen.
right?
Um, your entire psychological dynamic has changed since your fusion. Would you share with us how you've had to change the way you process trauma?
Yeah, so because our focus has been health, we were working on trauma processing before the fusion, and had processed our most charged memories. So the benefit is like I don't think we could have experienced fusion without having processed those first because they were very much um, just raw. And so when we came together, anger is not the only thing then accessible, but things like our traumatic past is now accessible, but because the worst of it was processed, that it's lacking that like life altering charge where you just can't process, you can't move forward. Um, we're still doing trauma processing because the PTSD symptoms have been the most intrusive for us in this whole process. Um, we've been doing a technique called DBR, deep brain reorienting, um, which has been really, really good to use. We don't necessarily even have to have a memory. You can use like a trigger. And so that has been um, continuing because people are like, are you still in therapy? Yeah, we're still in therapy. Like we still got stuff to process. Um, and that's been what we have been working on is the other because complex trauma, like yes, this was probably the worst of it, but then there's this and this and this and this, and these other things also need to be processed.
Um, would oh, is your head quieter now?
Very much so. That was the first thing that we noticed because while like we had more emotional access and just a, a larger sense of self, what we noticed was the quiet up here. Um, and interestingly enough, I told my therapist, I was like, I actually talk to myself out loud more now than I did before. Um, but there's not the internal back and forth. It's just the like I what I imagine is the thought process that singlets normally have. So everything feels like me. There's not thoughts that like intrude on my own and feel outside of myself.
Um, has there been any, this is something you've touched on, so there hasn't been any grief process for you as your alters have formed. Has there been any grief from your husband?
Yes. So for us, because we're inside the fusion and we can still feel all of us in present. So like there's the fullness and not a feeling of loss, but addition. But outside the fusion, that's not people's experience. They don't see the individuality in an alter is fronting and then another alter is fronting. And initially the Hubs was very distressed. He was like, I love everyone. I don't want them to go away. And as this has gone on and he's been able to see like in our day to day, he'd be like, there was some Lil in that. Oh, there's some JA in that. And he can see that we're all still here. We're just here differently. Um, that now he was like, okay, I can be on board with that. But that was actually really comforting response for us because that was our thing. Like, we don't want anyone to disappear. And for him to be like, no, I don't want anyone to disappear. That's like the most healthy acceptance to be like, all of you is welcome in this relationship. And that's the standard is like all of you. And as he's seen that that has been, the product of this is that we're still all, he's like, okay, yeah, this will work.
I'm really glad to hear that. I know that my love, because I've talked about how fusion for you occurred naturally, and when I told him that, he was very distressed. He was like, "Wait, you mean it can just happen? Wait." What do you mean it can just happen?
Right. And yeah, I think that's the best response.
It really was. It shows how much he cares about all of us. And I'm gonna be honest, I've cried about it a couple of times when he hasn't been here, just because it's been so touching. That
Hmm.
just he cares so much. And he was part of the reason I put that question in. Um he really wanted to know
Yeah.
the answer.
You you can let him know that like you'll all still be there. Even if the form might be different, like he'll still be able to see and know and like it's good.
Um, would you mind telling us how your therapist reacted when you told them about fusing?
Because this is not our goal in fusion, she was very surprised and she was like, "Oh, are you okay? Do we need to try and like dismantle um and I loved her shock. Like, oh, like are you is this working for you? Um not every system has a gatekeeper, but we had a temporary fusion earlier on that had come undone. And so like E knew that if fusion didn't work, like she could dismantle it. And that was really a safety net. And so it felt like, especially in the early days, there was this sense of waiting and watching. Like, okay, we're functional before. We know we're functional. And if this way doesn't work, we can go back to this. And so it was a couple months that I really felt like this sense of like, is this gonna work? And so like, and my therapist had that same like, is this working for you? Because if not, like we can try and do things. And as it's shown to like to be beneficial, that sense of watching and waiting internally has dissipated. But it took probably 3 months before that started lowering. And I'm like, okay, this is definitely like we're going to continue in this trajectory. Like it felt settled inside.
Has the way you interacted with your loved ones changed, and how so?
So there's been some interesting things like you said, some altars are quieter and the flavor more subtle. And I was not sure how that would shake out, especially as we have alters who are like JA, it's a lesbian and very like about men, and we are married to a man. But with fusion, um, we've actually been like overall flirtier. And I was like, because Anthony did not front a lot, I was like, I did not realize like how strong his influence would be in the whole. There's not been any complaints about the extra flirtation. Um, but we've definitely been flirtier, we've been chattier, which like Lil was an absolute chatterbox. So I find that our videos like that we make on YouTube, they tend to be longer now. Instead, we try and keep them under 15. We got ADHD, our attention span's not that long, but we would make a video that'd be 3 to 5 minutes, and now they're like 8 to 10. And so just these little things like that as it's shaking out. So we definitely um like there's been adjustments to like more of a constant, like more frequently flirty, more frequently chatty, um, more able to engage in a social situation. That one has been a lifesaver because we're very introverted, but like when we're doing online work, or when we're going to a work thing with the hubs and we have to be social to be able to access those traits from E and from Lil, and just step into that social moment without, before we'd go and be like, please, one of the social alters, please come out and talk to people. Like, I don't want to, no, no, don't make me people. and to know that I can go into a social situation and be present in a social way, and then go home and be like, okay, I'm reading for the rest of the night. Good night, y'all. Like, it's different, but it's been it's worked really well.
Good, good. That makes me really happy to hear. Um, So it's so nice to hear that your husband. I have a couple questions in here about your husband that you actually already answered, which is perfect. Perfect. I'm so glad. Oh, this is a good one. In your personal opinion, do you see fusion as the ultimate healing goal for all systems now? I think I already know your answer, but I'm so excited to hear. I'm so excited.
Um, like, absolutely not. So, like, hard no. Um, so we've done a lot of reading on the subject before we experienced fusion, and we found that some systems who wanted to fuse were never able to achieve it. Sometimes fusion happened spontaneously, and a lot of times, even if fusion happened, there would be um, times that the system separated out again in response to new traumatic situations. So we were like, okay, well, that's really a variable outcome. Um, and so post having fusion happen and knowing that I think a lot of people who pursue fusion pursue it because they want to be normal. They want it just to be like the host. Sometimes the host just wants to be the one in control and not have anybody else, which is not what happened. Um, like a lot of those motivations aren't true of what happens in fusion. But also, if you force a fusion, alters who haven't been able to put aside their differences, um, that's now going to be absorbed into a discordant sense of self, a like, oh, I can't stand that aspect of me. Whereas like we spent so much time learning to accept and love each other. The amount of self-love, like I when I started therapy, the therapist asked me to list some positive qualities about myself, and I could not tell them one. Not one positive thing. They were like, nothing. I was like, no, there's nothing good about me. And because we spent all this time learning to love each other, there's so much self-love, so much self-acceptance. I could give you a long list of positive traits, but even the traits that might be seen as negative, like I can accept them with love because that's what we did for each other. And so if a person cannot, for whatever reason, do that or has not done that work and they experience fusion, there's going to be a decrease in functionality. We saw an increase because we had done the trauma processing work, we had done work in acceptance with each other. And so we were able to come together in a way that added to functionality. But without doing that work, it would subtract from functionality. And sometimes the the traumas or the things experienced were severe enough that it may not be possible. Some alters may always have to hold it aside. Um, so we are very strong functional multiplicity proponents, like absolutely like go for that. And then if fusion happens, like maybe it'll happen. If it never happens, it doesn't have to happen. Like we were happy, we were functional, had a great relationship with our spouse, our kids, had job profession that we worked at separately. And it was good. We fused and it was good. But I think pushing fusion on multiples is a big no.
That is so, so reassuring to hear. Fusion for us is a very scary idea. It's, again, if it's what's best for us, then we will have to go through the process of accepting fusion. But we are quite, we are a little scared, um, that it might happen suddenly without any warning, and how on earth we would process that on top of everything else that we have on in our life. Um, And also, I think it's so brave that you talk about fusion on your channel now. Because the tone of your channel has changed a little bit, and I think that was really, really brave of you.
Thank you. It's always for us been about inviting people into our experience. And we wanted to continue doing exactly that.
Um, so now I have a couple of questions from people that just two questions that have been submitted, and then a closing question. So from Nightshade in my Discord, what are some major differences in day-to-day life that you've noticed now that you've integrated versus when you weren't? Is there anything that you miss or that you've had trouble getting used to?
So one of the big differences is there is dramatically less dissociation, um, dramatically less. And um, which makes when we dissociate more distressing because it's not this kind of constant background noise now. So when it happens, we're like, oh, dang, like I don't, hmm. Um, and that's been a really big difference on our day-to-day experience. Connected to that, because we have chronic health issues, um, we had several alters who had much higher pain tolerances and were able to dissociate when the body was experiencing a lot of pain. Um, our experience of pain is more now. And while we don't want to experience more pain, the benefit it has been where at the beginning we were like, Jenna would push the body past what was healthy. We can't do
Mhm.
that anymore. We cannot ignore our body anymore. So the result is healthier, but more pain is not necessarily pleasant. So those have been some of the biggest like day-to-day changes. And I don't remember all the nuance on that question. Did I answer it fully?
You did. You really did.
Okay.
You did a great job.
Okay.
Um, oh, is there anything that you've missed?
Mm.
Was the last thing that I think was left.
Um, so well, we don't miss each other because we still feel each other. I do miss the inner world. We've only experienced that in dreams since fusing. Um, but we have experienced it. But having that has been like, I don't know, it's just something that has not been there that's been like, oh, I do kind of miss that.
Um, what's the most important thing that you've learned about this newfound discovery, and do you all act as a singular person now? From Spam.
Hi, Spam. Um, so the most important thing that we've learned, I think, is that nobody has been lost, that there hasn't been a death, a losing. Um, it has been difficult to talk about things that we've experienced because when we remember something, we'll use like I, because whoever experienced it in the first person I. Um, but then to say me, Jenna, doesn't feel authentic to the whole experience. But also in our day to day, like plenty of people didn't know we had DID and just called us Jenna as the host name. And so um, we we've really wished we were in a society, several different types of society having name changes is very normal. You have a big life change, you have a name change. Um, you even see this like in the Bible, don't call me what was it? gosh, Ruth and Naomi. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. And that sort of thing, of big life changes indicated with a name change. And so if we were in a society where that is something that was just like typical and acceptable, we would probably go by a different name. We would probably just be like, yeah, call me Gianu. Because that has always been the name that represented all of us. Um, as it is, like we use Jenna because that has been the masking name, the host name. But it feels like incomplete to say that. And also, while talking about like the whole, we've been using we here. Um, we've also been using plural pronouns more in day-to-day life accidentally. Like, and so, eventually that might taper down to I as we have more like first person experiences as this whole new. Um, but for now, we comes out a lot. So that has been very, very interesting.
Um, Now my closing question. If you could go back to when you were diagnosed and say one thing to yourself, what would it be?
Mm. I would absolutely tell her it gets better and not to be afraid. I was so afraid. And it was very scary. And to be like, it's gonna be okay. Like there's nothing to fear in here. I would absolutely tell her that.
That is beautiful. There's nothing to fear in there.
Mhm.
That is a beautiful sentiment. And anyone, if you're watching and you have DID or you think you might have DID, I think that that's something that you should really take and hold on to. Um, Thank you so much for coming on my channel with me, Gianu. I appreciate you so much. I can't believe you said yes.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you to my community who I never would have asked without. So thank you for being so amazing and for giving me all of your support. And oh, there's so many nice messages in chat. I'm so happy for you, for you, Gianu. And thank you. And oh, just I love my chat. They're so wholesome and great. Oh, another thank you. Well, everybody, have a great evening. Take great care of yourselves. Remember to take breaks. Remember to drink water, and take great care of yourselves. Remember to believe. Bye, guys. We're gonna have to hang on 1 second so that it works.
Oh, let me see if I can make fireworks. Or is this ticker tapes? Hey, ticker tapes.
As soon as I see the ticker tapes, we'll call it. I'm gonna end meeting and then call you on Discord, okay?